This question tests understanding of foreign exchange markets under a floating exchange rate system. In a floating system, exchange rates are determined primarily by market forces of supply and demand. A currency depreciates when demand for it falls or when its supply in the foreign exchange market increases. Students should understand how inflation, income levels, interest rates, and capital flows affect currency values. Lower inflation generally strengthens a country's currency because its goods become relatively cheaper. Higher national income increases imports, raising demand for foreign currencies and weakening the domestic currency. Higher interest rates attract foreign capital, increasing demand for the domestic currency and causing appreciation. Reduced capital outflows keep money at home, decreasing the supply of the domestic currency in foreign markets and supporting appreciation. The question asks which event would cause the Swiss franc to depreciate, meaning the franc would lose value relative to other currencies. A. U.S. inflation declines relative to the Swiss inflation. Correct. If U.S. inflation falls while Swiss inflation remains higher, U.S. goods become relatively more competitive. Demand shifts toward U.S. products and away from Swiss products, reducing demand for Swiss francs and causing the Swiss franc to depreciate. B. U.S. income levels improve relative to the Swiss. Incorrect. Higher U.S. incomes generally increase U.S. imports, including imports from Switzerland, increasing demand for Swiss francs and tending to appreciate the Swiss currency. C. Swiss interest rate rises relative to the U.S. rates. Incorrect. Higher Swiss interest rates attract foreign investment, increasing demand for Swiss francs and causing appreciation rather than depreciation. D. Decrease in outflows of Swiss capital to the U.S. Incorrect. Lower capital outflows reduce the supply of Swiss francs in foreign exchange markets, supporting appreciation instead of depreciation. Correct answer. A. U.S. inflation declines relative to the Swiss inflation. Exam tip. Remember the basic currency relationships under floating exchange rates. Higher inflation weakens a currency. Higher interest rates strengthen a currency. Higher domestic income increases imports and weakens the domestic currency. Capital inflows strengthen a currency, while capital outflows weaken it. Comparing relative economic conditions between countries is essential when analyzing exchange rate movements. This question tests the effect of exchange rate movements on international trade. An appreciation of the US dollar against the British pound means that $1 US can buy more British pounds than before. In other words, the dollar becomes stronger and the pound becomes weaker. A stronger dollar has two important consequences. British goods become cheaper for US consumers, because fewer dollars are needed to purchase the same amount of British products. Goods become more expensive for British consumers, because they must exchange more pounds to obtain the stronger US dollar. As a result, Americans are likely to purchase more British goods, while British consumers are likely to purchase fewer US goods. These changes reflect the effect of exchange rates on the relative prices of imports and exports. The question asks which outcome is most likely when the US dollar appreciates relative to the British pound. A. British demand for US products would increase. Incorrect. A stronger US dollar makes American products more expensive in Britain, so British demand would generally decrease rather than increase. B. US demand for British products would decrease. Incorrect. Because British goods become cheaper in dollar terms, US consumers are more likely to buy more, not less, British products. C. US demand for British products would increase. Correct. The appreciation of the dollar increases the purchasing power of US consumers, making British imports relatively less expensive and increasing US demand. D. Trade between the US and Britain would decrease. Incorrect. The total effect on trade is uncertain. While US imports from Britain may increase, British imports from the US may decrease. Trade does not necessarily decline overall. Correct answer. C. US demand for British products would increase. Exam tip. A useful rule is: a stronger domestic currency makes foreign goods cheaper and domestic exports more expensive. A weaker domestic currency makes imports more expensive and exports more competitive. Thus, when the US dollar appreciates, US imports tend to increase, while foreign demand for US exports tends to decrease. This question examines the factors that influence currency appreciation under a floating exchange rate system. A currency appreciates when its demand increases relative to its supply in the foreign exchange market. Economic variables such as inflation, interest rates, income growth, trade balances, and monetary policy all affect exchange rates. Students should remember several key relationships. Higher inflation generally weakens a currency because domestic goods become relatively more expensive. Higher real interest rates attract foreign investment and strengthen a currency. Slower domestic income growth tends to reduce imports, improving the trade balance and increasing demand for the domestic currency. Restrictive monetary policy often raises interest rates and strengthens the country's own currency. The question asks when country A's currency would appreciate relative to country B's currency. Country A has a higher rate of inflation than country B. Incorrect. Higher inflation reduces the purchasing power of country A's currency and makes its exports less competitive, leading to currency depreciation rather than appreciation. B. Country B has real interest rates that are greater than real interest rates in country A. Incorrect. Higher real interest rates in country B attract capital inflows, increasing demand for country B's currency and causing country A's currency to weaken. C. Country A has a slower rate of growth in income that causes its imports to lag behind its exports. Correct. Slower income growth reduces demand for imports, improving the trade balance. Lower imports mean less demand for foreign currency and relatively greater demand for country A's currency, leading to appreciation. D. Country B switches to a more restrictive monetary policy. Incorrect. Restrictive monetary policy typically raises interest rates in country B, attracting foreign investment and strengthening country B's currency rather than country A's. Correct answer. C. Country A has a slower rate of growth in income that causes its imports to lag behind its exports. Exam tip. Remember the general rules of exchange rates. Higher inflation weakens a currency. Higher interest rates strengthen a currency. Lower domestic income growth reduces imports and can strengthen the domestic currency through an improved trade balance. Tighter monetary policy generally strengthens the country implementing it. Understanding these relationships is essential for analyzing currency movements in international finance. This question tests knowledge of currency risk management and the use of foreign exchange derivatives in long-term financing. A Japanese company needs euros to finance a long-term investment in Germany, but plans to issue a 20-year bond denominated in Japanese yen. The challenge is that the company will raise funds in one currency, yen, while needing cash and making future payments in another currency, euros. The most appropriate financial instrument should allow the company to exchange yen cash flows for euro cash flows over a long period of time while reducing exchange rate risk. Students should distinguish between forwards and futures, which are generally used for short-term currency transactions, options, which provide the right but not the obligation to exchange currencies and are commonly used for hedging uncertain exposures, currency swaps, which exchange principal and interest payments in different currencies over many years, making them ideal for long-term foreign financing. Because the bond has a 20-year maturity, a currency swap best matches the long-term nature of the financing requirement. A. Currency forward. Incorrect. Forward contracts typically hedge a single future exchange transaction and are not suitable for managing a 20-year stream of payments. B. Currency swap. Correct. A currency swap allows the company to exchange yen principal and interest payments for euro principal and interest payments over the life of the bond, effectively converting yen debt into euro debt. C. Currency futures. Incorrect. Currency futures are standardized exchange-traded contracts, generally used for short-term hedging, not long-term financing arrangements. D. Currency options. Incorrect. Options provide flexibility, but are generally used for uncertain exposures and would be prohibitively expensive for a continuous 20-year financing need. Correct answer. B. Currency swap. Exam tip. Match the derivative to the exposure. Forward/futures, short-term exchange rate hedging, options. Protection with flexibility when future transactions are uncertain. Currency swaps, long-term exchange of principal and interest payments in different currencies, making them the preferred instrument for financing foreign investments with long-term debt.